Okay, I do want you to have a basic understanding of the anatomy and the physiology of how humans produce speech. Speech in general is caused by the motion of air past the vocal cords. There's a lot of cool physics that goes on along with that that has to do with the Bernoulli principle, and even the ideal gas law comes in. Our Boyle's law comes in as we force air past the vocal cords. We're not going to get much into that here, but the air is forced past the vocal cords uh, because of the diaphragm. Of course, that diaphragm is, if you have your lungs here, the diaphragm is a muscle right here. The lungs aren't muscles, they can't move on their own. So the diaphragm either makes the chest cavity bigger or smaller, and then that changes the volume of the lungs, allows them to expand or to contract and exhale the air that's within them. So the diaphragm can change the volume of the chest cavity, causing you to either bring in air or expel air. Now, air moves from the lungs through the trachea. This is sometimes also called the windpipe. And then to the larynx. And the larynx holds a couple different things, but it has the vocal cords. The vocal cords are within the larynx. These are sometimes called the vocal folds. Um, and this is also, the Adam's apple. If you've had anatomy, you must have seen this before, but I'll just show you a picture. So here's the larynx right here. It's the Adam's apple. So if you can touch your Adam's apple, that's your larynx, and it is connected to the trachea, which takes air from the lungs. This is your diaphragm here, that big sort of sheet-like muscle that expands or contracts your chest cavity and causes you to either bring in air if it's expanded or expel air when it is contracted. You can also see the vocal box here. You don't need to know all these details, but inside the vocal box you have these folds. The vocal folds are the vocal cords, as we call them, that you force this air past them. When you force air past them, it causes them to vibrate, and that's actually what causes the sound. Now, the vocal cords are inside the larynx, which moves them, excuse me, with cartilage and muscle. Sorry, I got a little piece of granola in my vocal fold. Sorry about that. Okay, now the cords are actually muscles that can open or close depending on the situation. So these are actual muscles, and the space between the vocal folds is called the glottis, the vocal cords. And there is a technique in singing called a glottal stop. And a glottal stop is when you close the glottis, and this causes a particular sound. I have a video. This is just about singing. You need to know what a glottal stop is, that it's a closing of the glottis, but you don't really need to know about the singing part. But I think it's fairly interesting, so you can watch this if you want. Now, the frequency of the sound that's produced by the vocal cords is given by an equation that we've seen before. It is this 1 over 2L. That's the length of the cords divided by the tension in the cords. Remember, they're muscles, so you can change the tension, divided by the mass density. So we can't really change either the length of the vocal cords or the mass density. That's sort of dependent upon who you are, right? Every person has a slightly different length vocal cord and a mass density in their vocal cords. It's what you're born with. But your vocal cords, because they are muscles, very much can change their tension. And that's why you can go high or you can go low. You can make different types of sounds. So a greater tension will give a higher frequency. So if anybody ever asks you to give a high-pitched sound, you say, well, hold on just a second. Let me increase the tension in my vocal folds, and then I'll be able to do it for you. Okay? Now, the length of the vocal cords also affects the frequency. And men tend to have larger vocal cords and longer, have a larger larynx, and hence also longer vocal cords. So they tend to have a lower pitched voice. And then further, the amplitude of the sound is governed by the amount of air that flows past the cords. All right, we'll stop with that. Not a whole lot of detail on this, or with the ear, but I just sort of want you to know the basic parts. The vocal folds, or the vocal cords, are also called. The larynx is there to protect them. The trachea brings air to them. You force air past them. You should know what a glottal stop is. The basics, you might have a diagram, and I'll just ask you to identify the larynx, or the vocal folds, or the trachea, or the lungs, or the diaphragm. Okay, I will post an image of this. You don't have an image in your book, unfortunately, but I will post one for you. Next, we'll get to hearing.